Hello and welcome to this Feedback for Learning online course review. It was a pleasure being part of the facilitation team and seeing where you as participants were reflecting on your learning and some of the ideas that you shared, which you've been using in practice. It's always fantastic to see the things that you actually do, and also how your thinking and ideas developed across the 3 weeks of the course. So I've had the opportunity today to just go away and have a look and review the learning of the teachers on the course and just pick out a couple of highlights, really, some things to talk about, which I think have been really interesting to see. So without further ado, I had a look across the different weeks and looked at where there was hotspots where people were talking about particular things that were affecting their thinking or their practice. In week 1, where we were looking at what effective feedback is, we looked at lots and lots of different aspects of feedback. We considered feedback dimensions, specifically how we can make feedback specific and accurate so that it helps the learners. We focused on Hattie's 3 questions that come across actually not just Hattie but in lots of the research. And lots of people talk about these 3 questions in terms of feedback. You know, where for the pupils, where am I going? How am I doing? What do I need to do next? And we looked at different ways we can have pupil-teacher dialogue in terms of feedback conversations, and we looked at the idea of feedback being either a gift, ping pong or loops, work that comes out from Askew, and then we looked at the importance of a classroom culture where feedback is at the heart of what's occurring, where mistakes are seen as part of a learning opportunity and teachers are highlighting and picking these out up front. So lots of things we talked about, and as we know, feedback is very much linked between learning and assessment, that evidence that we gather to help our pupils then move forward. So some of the things that people were picking out that were really helpful for them in week 1 was how they were thinking about their feedback definition and what aspects of it. It was really interesting to review the definitions that people had shared on the course. I would say, looking at them in week 1, they were very much teacher directive. So the feedback was very much in the camp and ownership of the teacher. The teacher was the one doing the thinking. So from the definitions, it was the teacher providing direction, the teacher providing next steps. In terms of my research and looking at feedback, a lot of what I did drew on the work of Torrance and Pryor, who looked at 2 ideal typical approaches to assessment and talked about convergent and divergent, and I expanded that to cover the ideas related to feedback. And I would say that the feedback definitions that we were getting from people in week 1 were very much those definitions that were in the convergent field, where it's the teacher's control. It links very much the idea about feedback as gifts. The teacher is the one more cognitively responsible about highlighting the areas for next steps and supporting the pupil moving forward by telling them what it is that they need to be doing. So that was really interesting, because what I noticed as I moved towards the end was that people's ideas changed. And I think that's really powerful, because that's one of the things that we wanted to do for you on this course, was to take you on a learning journey from where you're at to move you forward, just like we are with the pupils. Again, it's that moving forward our learning horizons that we talk about a lot on the courses that we run. Other things that I spotted and noticed as I looked through week 1, many people liked thinking about the difference between feedback and judgments and evaluations. Somebody said, I'd not thought about the fact that actually what I've been doing, I wouldn't class as feedback now, because I'm not giving the pupils any ideas about the actions they need to take to move forward. And we really wanted to make that difference very clear, that evaluations and judgments, coming up with a summation of where you're at or how well you've attained or where your learning is at, is not feedback unless there is the opportunity for pupils to think about what it is that they need to do to move forward. And that came out really strongly for people. That was something that had highlighted for them what feedback is, and then how they can actually implement that in their classrooms. Several people talked about challenges with feedback, and this comes out regularly. Particularly, I think the one that resonated and came out the most was this idea about time. If feedback is really powerful, how can I manage it? How can I manage it? And, you know, we gave lots of ideas throughout the course, and it was really nice to read ideas in week 1 that people were using to help them with this. And in particular, linking to the idea of those 3 questions, where am I going? People were talking about the power of using success criteria, whether that be rubrics or lots of different ways of using it to help support pupils in where they're going, and how they can actually, in terms of time efficiency, get the pupils to identify what it is that they need to be doing themselves. There was the discussions as well in terms of time about actually using pupils effectively as learning resources for each other by getting them to work together in groups or regrouping pupils, so that the teacher was capable of moving around and intervening at different places for different pupils. Somebody talked about how they would run a focus group for pupils who were having difficulties while everybody else was working on different aspects of the concept that they were looking at that day. So it was really powerful to see how people manage those ideas of time. And as I said, there was lots of ideas that we've shared throughout the course that will support with that too. So it's really good to pick those things up. So thank you. In terms of week 2, we started looking at, so we moved on from the feedback dimensions and culture and what research said was effective, to looking at how we could actually do this then when we're providing written feedback for either individuals or whole groups, or when we're providing oral feedback. And one of the things that comes out strongly from the research and from people's experiences and reflections is that actually feedback during the learner is one of the most powerful ways of supporting the learner in moving forward on that learning journey and developing their understanding. And that came out strongly. People were saying that, you know, the opportunity to provide feedback during the learning was what they wanted to do, which was why the idea of the challenge of time, I think, came out in week 1. So in terms of some of the highlights from week 2, people liked looking at the ideas for supporting how we can facilitate feedback efficiently to manage that time issue that we talked about in week 1. And we provided a range of ideas for supporting individual feedback. And again, it was really interesting to see what people voted for, and it's lovely to read how people were using ideas with their pupils, including really young children down in early years in primary, talking about how they were getting pupils to actually engage with this idea about where do we need to go next in the learning. So some of the ideas that came out from the polls, people really liked and were using feedback rubrics. And again, it links to that idea that was discussed in week 1 about success criteria. The rubrics really are making it clear up front to pupils what quality learning looks like, and getting them to engage with that. Another idea that was voted for as being popular was the use of anonymous feedback comments. So this is the idea that a group of pupils are given feedback that's been cut up into strips, and they have their work with them, and they have to work out from dialogue with each other the feedback that goes with which work. So it gets the pupils talking about characteristics of the work and what they're finding is working well and where there are mistakes and how they can improve, and sharing ideas with each other in that moment of how they can improve. So people liked that. But what came out as the number 1 in the poll for you as a cohort was using coloured margin highlighting. And people were saying they were using the coloured codes in lots of different ways. The idea here is that we don't take away thinking opportunities, but we focus children on where their next steps are. So you'd use a colour-coded system, so pupils know what the colour means. So on this, you know, you might have on the right-hand side, the left-hand side, you might colour code yellow means that there's been a grammatical error, or orange means that there's been a conceptual error. And it doesn't tell you where on that line the error has been. The pupil then has to engage with that line, and I would have them group talking to each other again about what it is that they need to do to improve. And that was the one that came out, and people were saying again that they were using that even with younger children. I came across an idea recently, which I thought I would share. This was from a teacher in Wales. Wonderful idea that she shared. And she was talking about, you know, how we could use this coloured margin highlighting, but they were doing pass the parcel marking in her class. And again, this was young children in primary. Brilliant idea. So they play music while the children pass their work around. When the music stops, the children get the coloured highlighters and the children highlight the work. Not putting comments on, just again, coloured highlighting. So the teacher would work out a code and a colour scheme. The music plays again, the work gets passed around, a second person might colour highlight it. You do this as long as you want, and then pupils get their original book back and they have a look at what their peers have highlighted, and then, and this is the important bit to make it feedback, they act on it, that information to develop their thinking and develop the work that they've been working on. So I thought that was a really nice idea to share the Pass the Parcel. In terms of what else came up, people were talking about our idea about using whole class feedback response grids, and how they found that a useful idea to think about. And not only doing that when marking work, but whole class response grids can be used again live during the learning as you're walking around and actively listening to what pupils are discussing, what they're doing, what their work is that they're working on, and then responding in the moment by looking at the notes that you've made and thinking about what to do. And in terms of the poll, there was lots of things that came out as popular. You know, teachers saying that actually in terms of responding to this feedback, what they would want to be doing would be to sharing exemplar work, sharing common errors. And sometimes because we teach science, it might be that actually we need to note for next time that we come across a concept or some practical skill or work that the pupils are doing, something that we need to make sure that we address in the future. So teachers were saying that was important for them, or they would try teaching something in a different way, or regroup, as we've said, the pupils within the moment to get them working effectively as learning resources for each other. So lots of ideas there about how to respond in the moment, even when working with the whole class, to make sure that that time efficiency we talked about is addressed. And then finally, the last thing I picked out from week 2 was some really nice ideas that teachers had shared towards the end of the week about what they'd done to encourage pupils to gain confidence and ownership of the learning journey. Because one of the things that we talk about very much in this course is that feedback that's effective is not about improving the task or task performance, but it's about improving the learner and their learning, their conceptual understanding. Sadler talks about that actually it's difficult for us as educators. It's easier for us to talk about the effort put in and the attainment achieved more than it is about the mastery and the concepts that are being covered. So it was really nice to see teachers sharing ideas about how they've helped their pupils develop confidence. And they were talking about using self-assessment ideas, and again, even young children self-assessing. And one of the teachers' comments, and I thought it was lovely, that was when they reviewed where the pupils had assessed themselves at, nearly all the pupils were at the same level as where the teacher would have assessed them at. You know, a few weren't there, and the teacher made the really nice comment that actually it's made them think that they need to teach and model more how to accurately self-assess, because these are really powerful skills. And that's somebody talking about doing this right down with children of, you know, early primary years. So that's lovely to read. And then somebody else was talking about the need for honesty and how that takes time for pupils to understand that when they're self-assessing, that actually, if I'm going to learn best, then saying I don't understand something is really powerful, or actually saying, actually, I do get it, so I need to be confident. So it was really good that teachers were seeing that that need for honesty was really important. And they mentioned things like the RAG rating activities we talked about and exit tickets and things as mechanisms, but actually it's the culture that draws on these that's the important thing. And then finally, week 3, where we were looking at teachers' and pupils' roles then in feedback and different things that we could do to help that. Some of the highlights from week 3 were teachers were saying that they really wanted to improve students' motivation to feedback. It's ideas from the course that have helped them with that and that they've started using in class. So that's lovely. In particular, teachers were talking about the feedback expectations that can be established by teachers. We looked at some work by David Yeager that's called Wise Feedback, and people on the course were commenting about how much they liked that, about saying to the class that actually I do believe that if we work together you can get there. What is it you need to do? What can I support you with that? And saying that these things were having big impacts on in terms of feedback classroom culture. So that was really nice to see. Other things that were talked about was the idea about this receptiveness and responsiveness to feedback. We pulled in at this point on the course the work from Kluger and Denisi. They highlight that in terms of pupils' responses to feedback, that we need to make sure that the pupils are aware that if feedback means that there's actions to take, that they're ready and willing and motivated to engage with this feedback to move them forward. Kluger and Denisi highlight out of the 8 different things that we can do, only 2 actually work in terms of helping our pupils engage and be receptive to this feedback. Those things being that if a pupil has achieved the goal, that we raise their aspirations, that learning doesn't finish, that just because you've completed that work, that doesn't mean to say that we can't take that learning deeper, we can't move it into a different context, we can't move that concept on to another idea, that's a foundation to something else, and actually getting them to engage with that, to not give up their aspirations. And then the other thing was, if they haven't attained the goal, to make sure that the pupil is aware then that they need to do something different. And that's when feedback again can be very powerful. That it's not the idea that I give up, or I was never able of doing this, or I'm not good at science, miss, I'm not good at maths, miss. Actually, that's why I'm here to help you. And this idea then, right, okay, what different strategies are we going to try? What have we learned before we've done something similar? What can we learn by looking at what Matthew is doing over there? What could we do that, looking at this piece of work, how did they actually go about it? And so it's supporting the pupils in thinking about where they can put their efforts and try different strategies to maximize that engagement. And people were saying that they found that really interesting and useful to think about in terms of this classroom culture that they were developing. Finally, the last couple of things kind of linked together that people were talking about, and it's this idea about getting our pupils to work as learning apprentices. This comes very much from the work of Roy Sadler in terms of what we were unpicking on the course. The idea that as teachers, we develop this tacit expert knowledge over time about what good quality understanding looks like and what good quality learning looks like while that's happening. And that in order to really develop pupils as learners, they need opportunities to engage in evaluative experiences that help them deepen and develop their own tacit knowledge. And we talked, and Sadler talks about them as learning apprentices on that journey. And it's how we can support them with that. And people were saying that they really valued that thought and that idea to think of their learners like that, and really help pupils develop that understanding about what quality work and learning look like. And so it was this idea then that sometimes we rush pupils too quickly to perform before they understand the idea about the process. And so people really liked the ideas that we gave in the evaluative experiences poll, where we provided a range of ideas and said, you know, which of these do you think you could use? And the ideas that came out from that poll as being the favourites from this cohort was the idea of ranking. You know, in terms of quality, what is better and why? So we talked about how you could rank work, and I know Chris Harrison shared examples of lessons that she's seen where pupils have ranked work of different learners, and you can mock this up. I've got a box of exemplars I've built up over years, I'm sure you have too, and then pupils can put their own work within that continuum and say why, and then what do you need to do to move up if you're not at the top. And that's a really powerful process for the pupils to go through, and that came out as something that was liked. Another idea was about ranking the success criteria up front. You know, if this is an A answer and this is a C and that's an E, rank them. Why is that an A? Why is that a C? Why is that an E? And again, you know, the pupils rank the marking criteria rather than the work, and they say, right, well, the best work is going to have achieved these criteria. Right, now go and do your work. So we're helping open up that box of learning for the pupils so they do start to understand what quality looks like. Interestingly, I was working with somebody recently and they were talking about the work of Shirley Clarke, because many people mentioned on the course what a good one looks like and what a bad one looks like, a waggle and a wabble. And Shirley Clarke is now talking about, well, what excellence looks like. And actually, it's that opportunity. Mazzano talks about being able to compare and contrast really deepens our understanding of learning. And actually looking at several examples of quality really does help us unpick what excellence looks like. So sometimes one example isn't enough and we need multiple examples. So they came out as really popular. But what I think was really powerful for me in listening to was that for teachers on this course, they found that the collaborative learning and examples of how it was being achieved were really helping them take away ideas and use them in practice. And it was fabulous to read the ideas at the end of the course of how people have been trying things, how people were sharing what they were doing. the impact that was having on their pupils, their children, how the children were part of the process. Somebody was talking in one of the steps about how the kid, the language had changed, and it was like, where are we having difficulties? And the kids were responding to that and open and honest about what was going on. So it was lovely to read. And then, somebody posted at the end that it had really changed their thinking about their initial feedback definition, which had been very much teacher directive, but much more to this mutual relationship where, teachers are working with their learners and helping both receive feedback and act on it so that it benefited everybody in the classroom, us as learners, as the educators, our children as, and pupils in the classroom as learners who were supporting, and that actually this feedback practice and culture was changing and having an impact on their motivation and how they saw themselves as learners. And so it was just lovely to read and review that. We covered a lot of ideas in this course. It's a very rich course. It's heavily based on the research that underpins feedback. It is a difficult concept. It's a difficult area to understand, and we provided lots of exemplars and examples of how it could be used in practice, and teachers shared how they'd taken those away and other ideas that they were using. So it was a really rich learning experience, and I really enjoyed reviewing it. So thank you as always to you for your inputs. Lovely to read ideas that you're using and how you take away ideas and adapt them. Thank you to the National STEM Learning Centre for this opportunity. And I hope to see you all at some point on future professional development experiences.